First of all, yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak again. It's now, I think I stopped actually. I stopped the count at around 5 or 6 Codecamp events that I spoke. So it's probably it's close to or more than 10 by now. Yeah, and thank you all who are joining this online session. Looking forward to hearing your question, your thoughts about the things that I will talk about today. Now, this talk is not not necessarily a very how should I say, a very technical one, meaning that you will not I won't be focusing on very futuristic things in terms of technology framework, stuff like that. I would rather approach the next decade, what I consider to be the next decade of web development from some different perspectives, and I will focus a lot on how we will work, how we will interact, how we will collaborate, and stuff like that. And for those who want to catch the slides later, there's this link at the bottom, bit.ly/web 2030. It's public already. You can follow along the slides if you want to, and I also have it on the last slide in case so you don't need to remember any links that I'm showing or stuff like that. So yeah, this talk is called 2030, a Web Odyssey, and it started out as trying to put my thoughts on paper about how web development, how front-end development will change or will adapt in the coming decade. And the talk was kind of triggered by the fact that the web platform back at the end of 2019 was turning 30 years old, and I thought, wow, that's quite a round age for the web platform. Let's see what happened in these 30 years, and let's try to imagine what will happen in the coming decade. What will be some of the struggles of the community, especially in terms of developers. So let's look a bit at what happened in the past, right? What was how did we get here, right? In order to really try to even predict some of the things about the future. And I'm going to try during this talk to make 3 predictions kind of about what the future will hold. Let's try to see how we got here. How did we end up being web developers or front-end developers or full-stack developers? And yeah, we will talk about this in a bit. So it all started back in March 1989 when Tim Berners-Lee submitted this proposal at CERN about the first implementation of the World Wide Web. I like to pinpoint this always. It's a very nice piece of information, historical information by now, that the first review of the web or of the World Wide Web proposal was, someone wrote there at the top, vague but exciting. And I think that's quite an understatement for maybe one of the biggest, technological advancements of the past century, if not by the entire, modern history of humankind. So it all started here, right? And you know about the story about the first website, which is still available, right? So you can still access the first piece of HTML that was sent over the wire from one server to another. This talks a lot about the resilience of the platform and the way in which it's kind of passed the stress of time here. So in these 30 years, we roughly can see a couple of like we have actually 3 different decades, right? And a lot of things changed, right? Back in 1990 and the beginning of the 90s, we had very limited tools at our disposal, right? We slowly started building this kind of ecosystem around what web development is. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just the basics. But right there, after right about a decade of playing around, this kind of became a serious tool. And this is the age of the PHP MySQL stack. Again, of course, with HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And this is roughly the time, and it's quite interesting because it's right in the middle. So like it's 15 years after the beginning of the platform that we actually first coined these terms, right? Web developer, full stack developer, front-end developer. This is something that didn't exist before, right? Everyone was kind of developing, everyone was coming from a certain, maybe language experience with some sort of programming language or no experience at all. But the idea of a web or front-end or full-stack developer only appeared around here. And at the time, it was quite, basic, the things you had to do, right? You didn't necessarily have a lot of tools, but also the complexity of those tools was kind of limited. But then it slowly started, to gain more and more traction. And we started seeing, more frameworks, things like jQuery, Ruby on Rails, which really pushed the whole thing a bit further. And then in the past decade, it kind of exploded, right? I'm not sure how many of you witnessed, the beginning of the JavaScript revolution or the JavaScript age, but right around that time, with Node.js, with the capability of running JavaScript on the client and on the server, things just exploded. All of a sudden, you had new database systems, you had new frameworks for the front end, for the back end, you had new services, new kind of standards that people were starting to follow. And it kind of grows and grows and grows, right? And you don't really see, by the time, React comes into place and it kind of gets a lot of traction and gets a lot of, community awareness, you don't really see things slowing down. You only see things growing further and further, right? To the point where today you can pretty much do anything in the browser, right? You can compile other languages to work in the browser. You can do artificial intelligence in the browser. You can do graphics in the browser. Pretty much everything is still growing, and you see this kind of trend of getting more and more complexity on what you can do, or increasing the capabilities. But this can be problematic from a different perspective, if you want. Back in 2010, in order to be a so-called full stack developer back then, you had to know pretty much, this was your stack, right? HTML, CSS, PHP, maybe a bit of JavaScript that I didn't put there, and MySQL or something like that. And yeah, that was pretty standard, and there were recipes for, working, there were recipes for, getting into the field, and things were kind of simpler from a lot of perspectives. But today you have this increased stack, right? You have from the very basics, like from the database system, all the way to the front of the front end, which is still the HTML and CSS that you write. You have so many possible things that you can do, and I'm just putting here like a stack which I find pretty popular today in the JavaScript community. But of course, it can get even more complex than that. So the full stack of today is significantly more complex and significantly more significantly harder, to keep up to date than it used to be 10 years ago. Hence, my first prediction for the next decade is that we will see the death of the full stack. And this is coming a bit controversial coming from my side, because just 4 years ago, I was writing this article, which was pretty popular at the time, that was trying to advocate for the fact that, hey, full stack development is still going, you don't need to worry about the ever-growing complexity of things. I kind of changed my opinion on this, right? And I'm looking now for the next 10 years, I'm pretty certain that we must kill the notion of full stack development in order for us to keep somehow a good balance when it comes to mental health and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that people should not be full stack developers. I'm not saying that people should not have a passion for multiple parts of the stack. I'm just saying that we start having these higher and higher entry bars for what it means to be a web developer today, because we associate it with the notion of the full stack developer. And the question is, where you stop, right? Traditionally, a full stack developer was kind of a notion of uniting these two kind of big parts of the stack, if you want, right? The backend and the front end. But is this full stack development today? What about, you know, the other part? What about the front end of the front end? What about the DevOps, the infrastructure? Where do you stop, right? Where does this stack actually stop? You know, when is it enough? When are there enough things that you learn that you can call yourself a full stack developer? Unfortunately, I see this happening more often, that companies want people to be full stack because of the flexibility that this brings you, right? But the people have a problem. People start having problem with this, and I talk with a lot of friends in the community. I talk with a lot of newcomers to the community, and everyone feels overwhelmed with the amount of things that you need to learn. So I do understand that there is a place, you know, for full stack skills and for full stack knowledge. Like, these are some of the skills that would be, you know, necessary for someone to at least comprehend, not necessarily use on a daily basis, right? You need to kind of wrap your head around these things so that you could, you know, easily understand, you know, what the problem is in a more complex system that has all these problems. But on each of these verticals, you have so many responsibilities today and so many things to learn that it's simply impossible to keep up with everything. And a lot of people ask me, like, what is a UI UX dev? So I want to somehow, for example, give you an example of what this would be, right? On the UI UX vertical, you would have anything from, you know, CSS architecture and working with components and how you know, style your design system, responsive design accessibility, working with animations, browser support and browser APIs, web performance. These are all things that will add up to a full-time job. So again, looking at the community at the moment, looking at how complex everything is turning, I believe it is important for us to lower somehow the entry bar, right? To not ask that people cover this entire area, right? They don't need to be, you know, proficient in all parts of the stack in order to call themselves, you know, full stack developers and be able to jump from one thing to another on a project, because that really takes a toll on your mental health. And even now, if you want, in this year where that even becomes a more problematic thing, right, becomes a center part of your well-being, I think it's really important to kind of relax a bit these constraints about, you know, all the things I'm missing, all the things I need to learn. And I'm always giving the example of Dan Abramov here. For those who don't know him, he's one of the most popular and probably one of the smartest people in the JavaScript community. And he wrote this article back in 2018, and he kind of had the same idea in mind. Like, he wanted to, you know, put it out there that, hey, you don't need to know everything in order to be a proficient at what you're doing, in order to, you know, have a fulfilling job at the end of the day. And he listed out a long list of things that he doesn't know or never tried or simply doesn't understand, because people tend to think that, hey, he's Dan Abramov, he must know everything, right? So these kind of things should be normal, and this kind of approach would be beneficial, you know, for the entire community. And it's kind of an effort needed from all sides here to somehow get more understanding around this crazy idea at the end that, you know, full stack development is the only way to go moving forward. So yeah, this is the conclusion of the first prediction, if you want. Not only is like we have to, you know, you have to kill the expectation that everyone needs to learn the entire stack just so that we have more, you know, space for our mental health at the end of the day. But I don't want to keep this talk only about the developers, because there's a second group of people that are you know, part of the whole web ecosystem, and that is the users. What do the users get? You know, what do the users get in the next decade? Or what, better question, what did the users get in the last decade? You know, we got all these tools, we got all these new frameworks and libraries to work with, But unfortunately, if you look at the user experiences that we create today, they aren't that different than the ones that existed like 10 years ago. And that is because our focus is not necessarily in the right spot, right? This was a very famous image about how developers usually treat basic websites nowadays. And it is true, right? You see everywhere a lot of projects which are built with technology which is way more complex than the needs of that product or service. So I strongly think that the next decade will come a shift in focus, right? From us as a development community, we have to get to this maturity level where we no longer think about our own selfish needs. I want to test this technology, I want to try that thing, I want to work with that thing, but rather we have to think about the users. And for those who have seen some of my recent talks, I talk a lot about this thing, right? When you are working at a product that goes into production, you have to be aware that that product ends up being displayed on someone else's screen. And that person has a certain experience. It can be a good one or a bad one. And it's simply your responsibility, to make that good experience at the end of the day. So I strongly believe that we need, as a whole, as a community, to focus more on the users. And this has to happen in the next decade for web development to really be a viable thing, and for the web platform to remain relevant, if you want. First of all, in terms of our tools and our frameworks, what's happening at the moment is that everything we've built so far is pretty much centered on the dev experience, right? You can think about all the languages, all the libraries, all the frameworks that you use. They are helping you, right? Very few of them are helping the users, right? They are mostly helping you, they are helping you write maybe cleaner code, maybe more concise code. They are maybe abstracting some sort of complexity that you might encounter in your application. But very few tools actually go the extra mile and try to make it better for the user. And I think this shift of focus will look like this, right? All the frameworks and all the tools will have to slowly migrate and cover also parts of the user experience. And maybe, since it's maybe a bit of an abstract notion, you can think of it as baking in practices, right? By now, we have tons of checklists of databases, specifications about how to build a performant site, how to build a secure site, how to build an accessible site from all perspectives. And it's time to really bake that into the tools that we use, right? We already see some of these things with maybe linters that point you to accessibility problems, but I think this really needs to go at a more accelerated phase, up to the point where the tools that we are using, whether is the IDEs or the frameworks or libraries or visual systems, they have this kind of always available assistant there, right? The system that allows you to, doesn't allow you to make mistakes, right? It doesn't allow you to introduce performance problems into the application, optimizes things on your behalf. Because of course, knowing all the things can be daunting. You have to learn a lot of things to build an extremely good website today. But there are, of course, solutions to advance this. And I strongly believe that authors should start to focus their work on the user experience. But that's just, of course, again, one part of the problem, right? What about us? What about the developers, which are not necessarily involved in building those tools, but they are actually just involved in building the user experiences? Well, here it's a more problematic thing, right? Because what happens when the user experience is intentionally bad, or when the software system itself is harmful for the user, whether it is intentional or not, right? And we see this all over the place, starting to be the center of the discussion, right, about software, right, where software is eating the world. But is this a good place? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? You start seeing more and more discussions around ethics and design ethics. And I really like to show up here a couple of examples of what I call, or what is called a dark pattern, right? The web is filled with these things, right? Pop-ups that, you know, don't allow you to close them. Messages that are rushing you to buy something. Messages that are shaming you to subscribe or unsubscribe from a newsletter. I think these are all intentional things at the end of the day, right? Somewhere, someplace in a team, some developer was told to do that, and they just implemented it because it was asked, right? And I think we need to bring ethics. The next decade needs to bring ethics to the table, because without a clear set, you know, of ethics and of ethical rules about how we build software and how we build for the web, we will simply end up building, you know, a monster. A monster is already in the making. Not to mention all the problems coming with the rise of new technology, right? We see this every day with, especially with machine learning, that is, you know, coined as, hey, someone created a biased Twitter bot or a biased algorithm for, you know, that is affecting, for example, Black patients, as this was the case last year in October. And of course, the code itself is not biased, because that is a very fundamental human thing, right? The people that are working at the systems have certain biases. The data that they are using is biased, hence the systems become biased out of that data. So you see, it's both an intentional and a non-intentional maybe approach to this, but still it is in a way our duty to make sure that we make this better, right? To bring ethics into the discussion here. Now, you might say that you're not always, you know, working on products that maybe revolutionize the industry or that have a deep impact to our users. But I would like to present you a very small example that really got to me when I saw it last year in the autumn, just as I was preparing this talk. And someone showed me this website, which is built for women that experienced domestic violence. And in that bottom of the site here, there's a link here that says, click here to leave this site quickly. And when you click on it, it will redirect you to Facebook in the first tab, and it will open a new tab with the weather, and it will erase the history, so there will be no traces of you going on that website. And this kind of behavior is, this kind of, you know, action is necessary because the person, the user that was navigating on that website might be in real danger. So you see, there are situations that you cannot really think about where your actions, your the UIs that you build or the software systems that you build are directly impacting that person, that user. You know, I talked about it already, the person on the other side of the screen. So I think it's really important to bring ethics and inclusivity into the discussion in order to make sure, again, that we are building the right things, right? Not just building because, you know, we are paid to build stuff. Okay, and of course the question is, well, when do we have time, you know, to put so much focus on these things? Because we already talked about the full stack in itself, and only one part of the stack may be being so complex that it's very hard to keep up or to stay up to date. And here is where I'm trying to turn this story somehow into a positive thing, because I'm seeing a rise of a kind of a new wave of automation here. And of course, I would ask you to just imagine, if we were in a room, I would ask you to raise the hands, but I'm just asking you to imagine how many times you build, you know, components like this or screens like this, a login screen with all sorts of functionalities associated with it, like remember me, forgot password, and so on. You know, how many times you build cards like this to display some sort of data and some action buttons, or how many times did you build a menu that behaves differently on a desktop and on the mobile screen? These are all problems that we already solved, and we solved them many more times. You know, we keep solving them on different projects and most of the times we take everything from scratch again. So I believe that my third prediction, if you want, is that automation will augment our skills, right? We need to let technology work with us so that we can create those better experiences for the users at the end of the day. 2 years ago, I had a friendly chat with some friends in the community, and I came up where we were discussing about abstractions. I came up with this quote, which I thought it's quite funny in a way, but then I thought it actually makes sense, right? I mean, you do not have the capacity to develop all the software that is needed in the world. It's already known, right, that there's the software needed that keeps getting bigger, even though the pool of software developers also gets bigger, and we are not catching up, actually. So maybe it's time to, every time somehow the computer science world got to this point, it had to invent the next thing. It had to adapt and create the next layer of abstraction, if you want. And this happened from the beginning, right? From hardware, there was assembly language. You no longer just work on the hardware. You have now a programming language that allows you to manipulate the CPU cycles. Then, because it's impossible, to build everything in assembly, because you start having more and more demand for assembly, people invented more programming languages, more higher level programming languages like C, like Fortran, and so on. This was back in the 70s. Then in the 80s, already those considered lower level programming languages were getting behind. So people had to come with the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, right? We lived through some of these, right? We saw how at the beginning of the web platform, there were no frameworks, there was no higher level language for that, or there was no specification, for example, like GraphQL for doing requests over the wire, but now we have that. So now it's time, because we see that we reach this bottleneck, it's time to go at the next level. And the next level is called, if you want, the low code or no code level. And this is still still a problematic term. Some people have a hard time defining it. I don't want to get into debates about it, but it's basically allowing software systems to work, to create parts of the applications, subparts of the systems, without you having to go through the code itself. And you can think of a bit of tools like these, that there are tons of them already. Website builders that allow you to drag and drop stuff. This is some of the things I worked on in the past 2 years with Teleport HQ. But there are so many tools nowadays growing into this industry and approaching it from different ways. My original idea was, hey, what if we could have a website? This is the JSHeroes website, the older version, of course, which was due to take place in April 2020. And what if I can click a button somewhere on the website and say, hey, I want to edit this website. It will bring me to the platform. The platform will allow me to navigate as a user through the website, understand the structure of the website, whether I understand what the component is or not. It depends. I mean, I could work without understanding the exact details of a component, but I could go somewhere, I could edit something because I know how to edit something. It makes sense how you click on something, you edit some text, and when you click save, it will prompt you and say, hey, would you like to publish these changes to the site owner? And I think this is about bringing more roles at the table in terms of building something, and about relying on platforms like this that allow you to generate code, right? You don't have to code every single login form or button component. You can rely on some recipes that were already out there. You can rely on some very simple guidelines about how you drag and drop some elements and put together some parts, and you just have something that you can work on. You have a subsystem that is already functional. Another good example is Visly. This is a platform that allows you to basically manage your design system. You see all your components there. You can interact with the component. You have code documentation. This is a more dev-centric tool or a design-centric tool, but you can also open it, right? And you can visually change everything related to a component without having to go to the code, right? I can take these components. I can modify something there based on the design. And then I can save and I can publish it, and it will automatically link with my repo. So it will make a commit to my central repo, and all of a sudden I bring more roles into the same code base, right? I bring people working on the same, on the single source of truth, which becomes at this point the repository in the case of the tool. So yeah, there are tons of these examples. And what I think these are doing at the end of the day is that they offer us some sort of abstractions over parts of the stack, right? If I come as a front-end developer to a tool like Netlify or Heroku or now or Vercel, how it's called now, without any knowledge about infrastructure, I can spin up my server, right? I can spin up my website. Similarly, if you're a backend developer and you come to a tool like Visly, or like Teleport HQ or like Webflow, this allows you, to build from the front end of your website without having to code, without having to learn a framework or HTML, CSS. And if we bring, again, circling back with what we talked earlier, if we bring these good practices into the tools, it will be beneficial both for you as a developer and for your users. So I believe that automation and technology are making us full stack, right? Coming back to this, we might have our specialization on a single part of the stack, but with a tool like this, right? We just saw, talk about Firebase, or with something like Contentful, something like AppSync. I just put here some examples that I knew from the top of my head, but pretty much every kind of sub-industry of this has tons of different tools that allow you to nowadays easily work with these, abstract all of these complexities of the stack. So now we are able to call us again full stack developers, because we can just leverage the knowledge of others, right? I don't need to be an expert in infrastructure to deploy my website anymore. Or even if it's not just a website, even if it's a more complex application, maybe it has a node server, maybe it has some static files, I can easily set this up in one of the platforms that exist today without having to buy the server and set up everything on the server and so on and so forth. Now, one thing in particular I want to focus on, or I want to point here, is that these tools are not only allowing us, to rely on the knowledge of other people, but are also helping us with maybe the most important or the most challenging part of the daily work, which is the collaboration effort. So traditionally, a software system was built in a very linear fashion, right? From the idea, from the business person, to the designer, to the developer, and then to the marketer or whoever is in charge of the content, and then taking the product outside and putting it on the market. And every time you go from one person to another, maybe the business person sketches up something in some tool, it passes that to the designer picks up Figma or some other tool, it creates design for that, then that passes to the developer picks the file, starts coding from scratch, then the marketer needs to provide the data, it circles back to the developer. So there are a lot of these handoffs, and I call this the handoff hell, the traditional way of working. When you look at a process like this, you never figure out which is the source of truth, right? Once the developer has the code written and the designer has the design in Figma, what's the source of truth, right? When you have a problem, when you have something that is inconsistent from the design perspective. So these tools are actually bringing everyone at the same table, right? All these roles can now work especially if we are talking about platforms that allow you to visually code the front end part. Now you can bring everyone on the same layer, right? You can rely on the work of the designer in real time while the marketer is filling up the content, while the business person has a change of idea and talks with the designer and they shift around stuff, while the developer can work on maybe on the underlying system, and everything is put together, on the single source of truth, which is very important, especially if you want to be productive at the end of the day and not have to redo everything all over again. So not only that, automation and technology are making us full stack, they are also changing how we work. But lastly, I want to just give a final, to come back, to circle back to the idea that, hey, we are still in this and we are still doing it for our users. And in here, I think there are already signs that technology can be used to create better experiences for the users. This is, for example, an AI algorithm that automatically creates text captions for images that don't have one. This is one of the problems of accessibility of the web, because a lot of images are not captioned or not have any alternative descriptions, so a screen reader cannot interpret that image. Another example is something I picked up a few months ago. Someone building a system that recognizes sign languages and translates automatically. We talked about tools and all these systems that are augmenting our skills, but not only that, but they are also impacting, they are not allowing us to create harmful experiences for the users. And these are things like accessibility audits, that you have libraries to work with, or you have things like Lighthouse that give you this information in real time about your website, that, hey, you have a problem here in terms of accessibility, there in terms of performance, and so on and so forth. So I believe that technology is here also to stay. We should not ignore it. We should embrace the advancement. We should embrace all the platforms that basically streamline our work. And I think that automation and technology in the next decade will be put into the service of the user. Because if you want, the key takeaway from this is that central point. Like, we need now more than ever to focus all our efforts into ensuring that the users of the web get the better experience out of it. So I want to leave you with one thing, because of course these are just some predictions, and I have a quote that I really like from Yuval Noah Harari. This was taken from his second book, Homo Deus, and he says that if somebody describes you the world of the mid-21st century and it sounds like science fiction, it is probably false. But if somebody describes you the world of the mid-21st century and it doesn't sound like science fiction, it is certainly false. We cannot be sure of the specifics, but change itself is the only certainty. So this is the idea that I would like to leave you with, that in the next decade, things will change. We will have to adapt to new technologies, to new things. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we do it for the right reasons. And we focus, again, I cannot stress how important it is to focus on those user needs and that user experience that we are creating. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Alex.
Woo!
Yeah. So imagine this garden full of people. It can be true, It's gonna be reality.
That's a prediction.
Probably soon. That's a prediction. Pull it out in 2030, right? Okay. So we really enjoyed how you put the things on the table, but would like to discuss the first one with the full stack. It's the most controversial.
I know, that's why it was the first one.
How many discussions on this topic did you have in the past year?
It's interesting. The way I see this discussion on full stack is turning into a polarizing thing, where there's a camp that says no way full stack is always going to be the case. I will always prefer to be like the full stack developer that is able to jump from one part of the other to the stack. And on the other hand is the other group that keeps getting more and more, in a way, overwhelmed by the complexity of the full stack. So I like to think that the people that are still passionate about full stack will still be able to do it. If they still find it rewarding, then it should be their, it should be their way of working. But on the other hand, I don't want to disqualify the people that won't want to do it. And the people that would like to rely on, like I said in the third point, right, all these tools, all these platforms that allow you to basically be a full stack developer, right? You don't need to know all the details. You can learn the abstractions. Like I give an example, right? You can learn GraphQL and some sort of framework that generates all the CRUD application or the CRUD operations for certain entities, and you have your backend, designed, developed, and generated in code. But you don't need to look into the code or you don't need to understand the code to work with it.
Yeah, I see your point, and I think it's pretty much impossible to learn everything, and probably it's useless to learn everything. But there's a thin line, I think, that we need to draw between being able to do your job, like, well, maybe not fully, 100% full stack, but not to be like, in this position, I can't do anything because my colleague who just needs to move 3 bits from the left to the right, is not at the job today, and I cannot do it, or I will not do it. I do JavaScript. I don't get dirty with the, I don't know, messy Java or .NET or Python code, just because I'm a React, I don't know, 16 developer.
I know.
We tend to see in some situations too much of a specialization, which from a business perspective could create a lot of problems. So this is the balance we need to strike, probably.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm actually not at all a fan of the term "I'm a React developer" or "I'm a I don't know, C# MVP like ASP.NET developers. I don't know what's the latest thing. It's been like 6 years since I touched a
.NET 5 and C# 9, so just for your benefit.
Okay, so
and Java 14 or something, huh? So with all these code camps, we tend to learn all the
numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally agree with this, and I'm not. I think it's more of people don't really understand. Some people don't understand that being specialized doesn't mean that you're being ignorant of the other side necessarily, but it does mean that if you work on a project, for example, if you are responsible for the front end of a project, then you are responsible for a lot of other things than just the React components that you are building. You are responsible for all these front-end specific concerns like accessibility, performance, security, that are very hard. Like each framework, each language has their own problems, their own patterns of solving these issues, and you need to be responsible for that, right? You cannot just have you cannot just scratch the surface of front end and scratch the surface of back end and scratch the surface of infrastructure and then expect to be put in charge, deciding on how to implement a project. And this tends to create bad software, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have someone that knows how to solve these problems on the front end, on the back end, and on the infrastructure side.
I agree as well. So you need to, one needs to have a good understanding of the entire ecosystem that's around the project. So we can also make together in a team, make good decisions about the architecture and how things interact.
I still suggest everyone, I suggest, to have that T-shape approach to learning where you have your good fundamentals, right? You understand. I'm not saying you should be ignorant. Please don't get this. Like, you should definitely, if you work on the front end, you should definitely understand how a server works or what is a request to a server and stuff like that. So it's like understanding the basics, right? The T-shape. This is what it describes, right? a good chunk of fundamentals, and then you have your ways, your verticals of specialization on here and there.
Right.
And yeah, there are people who want to get specialized on a lot of things, right? They want to be also front-end developers and back-end developers, maybe also DevOps. That's fine, as long as it's their choice and it's not somehow enforced by, there's the company hires only full stack developers, or the company pushes you, if you work on the front end, to also go and work in the back end.
I don't even see a problem there. So if a company decides to do it, not a problem. But it's my decision to stay or to leave. That's probably.
Yeah, it's just that, people feel this kind of pressure somehow, that this somehow we don't really have a lot of good mentorship, I think, in the software world. So people are just kind of thrown into the pool, and we expect everyone to learn how to swim by themselves, right? And it can be a good experience, it can be a very fun experience, but it can be also a bad experience. So it's it's a double-edged sword, if you ask me.
I also want to come back to the other observation that you make, is that technology also comes now to help with this, because you get various tech stacks that help front-end developer jump over the back-end, or create that, make it easier for them. On the other hand, I also see that usually, or sometimes, people don't have, I know, if I'm a back-end developer, I don't have necessarily an adversity for working on the front end. It's just that it's different tooling, it's a different frameworks that I need to use. But then you see now, for instance, if you're a C# developer, now there's Blazor, and yeah, hopefully it will get more and more mature, but you can write code on the front end using C#. So that maybe can open different paths.
It's the same way as the JavaScript developers of the front end were kind of brought into the back end world with Node.js, right? All of a sudden even though, like, you could say, the language itself should not be a barrier. Like, if you do a bit more JavaScript and if you do some C#, you could technically, with not with a lot of hustle, switch from one to another. And what I think is hard is, once you're into that zone where you can switch from one to another, to be also up to date with all the things that are happening in all these small ecosystems that exist around.
Right.
Yeah, I think that
can be a burden for a lot of people.
And also the tooling, what you use for, I don't know, infrastructure or CI/CD or the servers, and then it becomes more more difficult.
Alex, before we close the session, let's spend 2 or 3 minutes to tell us more about Teleport, because I'm really fascinated by the technology that you're building there. I remember myself discussing with Paul a while ago. He was not disclosing too much because it was not the right moment. Yeah, but then he came at Codecamp and presented part of the technology or the main ideas and so on. So could you briefly tell us what you do at Teleport? Because I think it's an amazing Romanian technology that you're building there.
Yeah, so the company itself is, like you said, is Romanian, is based in Cluj. And the main product is the visual editor that I briefly showed in the slides, where you can basically, you have this visual editor for the front end. But this is just one part of the stack. You have so in the background, if you want, there are a lot of R&D tracks. Some of them based on algorithmics, some of them based on machine learning, that are coming to automate a lot of these steps, like passing from wireframe, from sketched wireframe on paper, and getting into a layout of HTML and CSS or whatever framework it is that you want to build on. I saw a lot of people kind of being afraid of this. I haven't talked about this, but people are kind of like, hey, you're stealing our jobs. I want to emphasize this, if you want, that it won't be ever the case, because building software it is my personal belief. It's not necessarily the belief of it's not like an official statement from the company, but I truly believe that there will always be those parts of the software. You take that abstracted parts and you need to put things together, right? You still need software development at that point to put things together. What you might not need is, low-level coding, right? You might not need to code a login form or some sort of requests that go to some endpoints. But still, putting everything together, it's still going to be a software development responsibility.
Yeah. Alex, if you don't mind, could you discuss with your colleagues to put on the roadmap something like, I don't know, speech to code or speech to architecture or mind to code features? Because I don't even like drawing, so I would very much prefer to discuss a little bit with the computer, say, well, this is how I imagine it, how you code it.
Actually, I think it's fascinating to talk with Paul about this, because he has some ideas into this direction that you could definitely. And I'm pretty sure that if you put all the ideas together, you can hit the jackpot there. But yeah, it's still early phase, and I think any technology that you see today, which looks like revolutionizing everything, it's still. I'm a kind of more like a skeptic here, because I want to think more about, how is this going to impact the world? Is it first? How are we going to leverage this? Because it's one thing to have the technology, right? Like we had AI for decades now. We had all sorts of, touch surface technologies for decades, but if we're not leveraging them, to make the world better, to create a positive change to the world, they are just there, right? They are for technology passionates, not for necessarily for people that want to solve problems.
Yeah, ditto. I agree.
All right. Yeah, since we're running out of time and we need to go on with the break. Well, thank you, Alex. It's been entertaining. And yeah, looking forward to next time.
To meet
either
again
at Codecamp or JSHeroes.
Yeah, meet again in the garden, right?
Or both.
Yep. Let's do it.
Have a great day.
Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.